enjoyed our banter this morning. Maybe it woke you up a little, and I do apologize just right out of the gate for having a 9 a.m. Monday meeting, or 10 a.m. for those of you on the eastern side of the state. It was hard to get all three of us in our schedules coordinated, and so I appreciate you guys logging in early. So the first piece that we're going to go over is the residency requirement piece for all state programs. So many of you will remember that we started a new compliance process July 1st, 2022. So we just completed one full year of doing our program reviews on this new methodology. And one of the things we found early on was by far the biggest, the most common audit finding this year, or audit warning really, was Tennessee residency. So all of our programs point to Tennessee Board of Regents TCA, that is 498104. It's in all of our policies if you need to reference that. But that basically says that in order to participate in state programs, that all schools are required to measure their students by the TBR residency policy. Now, that's students receiving state aid, not all of your students. And when we determined this was a larger problem, and just to let you know, like, why is this a big deal? Honestly, so legislators want to know that Tennessee dollars are going to Tennessee students. And so it's not even always, it's not like there's a ton of fraud out there. We're not, speculating students or, all indicating Tennessee residents on the FAFSA to get into the state. But even smaller programs, or not small, but when you think about our high school students, dual enrollment grant, that's something that I didn't expect to find any residency issues in, but we found foreign exchange students that were receiving dual enrollment grant. We found students who had moved to the area to live with a relative for one semester receiving dual enrollment grant. And so that's why this is important, because legislators want to know that we're spending our state funds on Tennessee students. When we realized it was such a across the state problem, I reached out to Jonathan Button at TBR. I knew that we were going to have to collaborate. What I asked him to do, because my fear was that we were going to interpret their policy and ask schools to implement it in a much more rigorous fashion than even TBR schools were doing. And so we did not want to do that. So Jonathan and his team at TBR have worked really hard to provide you a really easy flow chart, kind of step-by-step on how to determine residency. And so we're going to let Jonathan, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, because that's really who's going to give you the meat of this. And please feel free to ask questions. We'll definitely answer those if we can as we go. It may be more effective if we do them at the end of each attachment, James, just so that Jonathan can get through it. Jonathan?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Leah. And James, would you mind just increasing the size of that just a little bit? I can see it okay, but I'm afraid there may be some on the call that might need it a little larger.
I cannot see it.
Okay. Well, Leah, I didn't want to call you out. No.
Can we make it a hair bigger?
Yeah. It should, yeah, right there.
Okay.
Awesome.
Oh, we're getting better. I'm in business. Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. So as Leah said, we're going to talk about EVA and Tennessee residency today, and I hope as we go through these documents, you'll kind of see, our ultimate goal is always to reduce the burden on the student as well as staff at the schools, and while also remaining compliant. So we have a flow chart here that we'll be sharing, and then we'll be sharing two attachments with you. One attachment that is focused on the EVEA, and one attachment that's focused on the residency. So you'll see a couple of things on these documents. We'll just go ahead and get this out of the way. You'll see some banner processing notes. Of course, that's for banner schools, for our schools, and how we utilize banner to code this. If you don't use banner, just kind of think about that as this is an idea of maybe what I could do in my system in order to help with the compliance as well. And for us, the banner coding is very important, not only for reporting purposes, whether that's to THEC or wherever that reporting may be, but also it's very important because in banner, our schools use rules to stop aid from awarding and to stop aid from dispersing if the right code is not being used. So that is another mechanism that our schools use in order to maintain compliance. And that way, when Leah and her team are coming to audit, hopefully we're not having students paid incorrectly. So just kind of starting out with that statement there, for our banner processing, we use 4 main codes when it comes to our adult students coming in. We have a Y for in-state non-verified. We have an in-state verified, an out-of-state non-verified, and an out-of-state verified. The verified is the EVEA. So either they've been verified as lawfully present or they've not been verified. And then the in-state and out-of-state is self-explanatory on that. One thing I want to talk about before we go into the actual flowchart is the difference between EVEA and Tennessee residents. For some of our private schools, you all may not be as familiar with the EVEA process and how that's done, because honestly, it's not something you're probably doing at your institutions as much as the public schools would have to do because of waivers that are using state aid and other types of things outside of just state financial aid. So for EVA, just to make everybody aware, EVA is where you are verifying someone is lawfully present in the United States and that they're eligible. And then Tennessee residency, of course, is residency in the state. Someone can be lawfully present, but not a resident. Let's say, for example, you're at a school that is on the border with another state. You may have several students who are lawfully present, but they're residents of other states and they're coming to your institution. So that's just one example there. We try to collect as much as possible up front on the admission application, because what we don't want to create is a bottleneck situation where we have all these students being admitted, but then they're getting stopped at financial aid and having to supply things that they could very simply answer some questions on the admission app and get out of the way in the very beginning. So we have 2 primary questions. You'll notice that there's blue and orange. Blue is for EVEA, the orange is for the residency. One of the questions that we ask first of all is essentially, are you a U.S. citizen, a qualified alien, or lawfully present in the United States? And they're able to respond yes or no to that question. And then we also have a question of, have you lived continuously in Tennessee for at least the last 12 months? And that student would answer that question as well. And as part of that question, we also verify the student's permanent address on the admission application is in Tennessee. So we have 2 main flows here that we could kind of get into. And James, if you wouldn't mind just scrolling down just a little, thank you. So you could have a yes to both situation. So they answer, yes, I'm lawfully present, and yes, I'm also a resident. Or you could have a no to the EVA, but yes to the residency. No matter which one that you have on that, we're always going to verify EVEA. Now, you can do that in one of 2 ways. The easiest way is with a FAFSA. If the student's completed a FAFSA, the US DOE is reaching out, it's connecting behind the scenes, and it's checking that citizenship status, and it's confirming that, and that would come in on that FAFSA as confirmed. And FAST is automatically also coded to make sure that that's going through. So if something, for example, a student was not a citizen, not lawfully present, then that would stop that in FAST, and it wouldn't let the student be eligible for state aid based upon that. If the student hasn't completed a FAFSA yet, for our admission standards, in the absence of that FAFSA, then an applicant has to submit appropriate documentation from Attachment A, and we'll show you Attachment A later on in this presentation. Real quick, just for the private schools out there, again, EVEA is not really something that you might be collecting up front as much, because again, you're not going to be giving any kind of waivers or anything like that using state aid. So for you, you're probably going to be mostly relying on the FAFSA that's going to have that, and you're probably going to rely on FAST, honestly. And if the student doesn't have eligibility in FAST, then they're not on your rosters anyway for them to be eligible, and they would do that FAFSA. From the EVA verification on that side, we then go to residency verification. And the way we do this in the beginning is if the student answers the admission application questions indicating they're a Tennessee resident, then we consider that student to be an in-state resident so long as there's not any other conflicting information. So let's say, for example, that student answers all those questions correctly. The FAFSA has the information on a Tennessee resident as well. There's nothing turned in. We're good to go. But let's say that student turns in a FAFSA, and on the FAFSA they put a different address and they put a Kentucky address. Well, that's conflicting information. And at that point, we would take another step. So hopefully that makes sense there. Before we go on to the 3 ultimate options, let's talk real quick about what if a student says no to a residency question, or what if it is yes to EVA and yes to EVA, or what if it's no to both? So for the EVA, we're doing the same thing. We're going to do the FAFSA, or we're going to do the attachment A. But for the residency verification, because there's conflicting information, at that point, we need additional documentation from the student, and we move to an attachment B. And again, we'll talk about attachment B right after we talk about attachment A. All right, James, I think we can scroll down. So no matter what happens, we have 3 main buckets of what's going to occur with the student. The first bucket is our yes to EVA and to residency. We're going to update that student in Banner to a Z for in-state verified. And then with our schools, they're going to use that coding throughout everything else. Their awarding rules, their disbursement rules, and that's really what sets up that student to be awarded the state aid as long as they're on that FAFSA roster. Then there's a student who might say no to EVA, but yes to residency. You'll notice in that we leave it as Y in-state non-verified, and we notify the student of that status. And they can always come back and actually submit documentation from A to prove that EVA at a later date. And then for that third bucket, it's yes to EVA, but no to residency, or no to both. And for that, you could have 2 situations. You might have them as an out-of-state verified, meaning they're an out-of-state student. They do have EVA, but they're out-of-state, or an out-of-state non-verified. So they didn't verify EVA and they didn't verify that they were a Tennessee resident. And then we notify the student of the appeal process for residency, which is that attachment B.
JB, can I interject just 1 second here to connect to FAST? And Leah, that might have been what you were going to mention here.
No, you go ahead.
Just to connect to what JB's talking about here, back to the update residency to Z for in-state verified, and how to connect this into FAST functionality for everyone. So if for whatever reason the student is calculating as ineligible in FAST due to residency, maybe their parent residency is listed as Kentucky or Ohio or any state other than Tennessee. So FAST may still, if they're a new student, FAST may calculate them as ineligible, but you've gone through the flow chart. You have confirmed that that student is in fact a resident and should be eligible. You would then go to the residence history tab in FAST, and on the right-hand side of the screen, and I'm sorry, I can eventually maybe pull this up and share it in our QA environment or test, but the residence history tab on the right, in the drop-down, you would change the student to verified resident, and that will calculate eligible for all state programs. Okay, so in addition to the Z being a banner process, that's how you would update that student in FAST from ineligible to eligible. And as long as, Leah, correct me if I'm misspeak here, for promise, for hope, it will remain the same moving forward. As long as that student maintains continuous enrollment, that student will maintain eligibility. So, and that will calculate every single year moving forward while that student is eligible.
Good point, James.
Yep.
So something that I wanted to add that I think is important to hear on the call. So you can get really bogged down. First of all, if you want to go read this TCA policy and then go to TBR's policy, it's very confusing because it's technically talking about in and out of state tuition. So there were schools, especially our private schools, that said, well, we don't charge out of state tuition, so this doesn't apply to us. It does, because there is a residency requirement behind the scenes of that policy. And that's why I asked JB to do this. So just know, if you were to go read the actual policy, it talks about in and out of state tuition. But I just want to be very clear that although EVEA is different for state schools than it is private schools, every school in the state that pays state programs has to follow the residency, which are the orange boxes on JB's document. So just know that I know that that can be a little confusing, because it can honestly be confusing even for us and for state schools, I feel like, because EVEA and residency, they they may cross paths, but their purposes are very different. So just know that for private schools specifically, you are looking at the orange boxes to know how to implement this. And I think it's also important, you can implement this and then walk away from it, and you're not really verifying residency per se. There needs to be reporting behind this implementation. So for example, you can't just say that you're going to put these questions on the admissions application and go through these steps, but not have anyone that there's no quality control or checks and balances behind that. We need to make sure that not only is it implemented, but that someone is actually running some type of checks and balances to ensure that if there is conflicting information, that you're pulling that out and separately verifying those students. And Jonathan will talk about in just a minute how to go further and verify when you are unable to do so.
So
yeah, oh, sorry, James.
No, I was just, we had a time, and I'm bad about questions. I like to kind of answer them as they come in if they're relevant, but do we want to wait to the end or what?
No, I mean, if we can, we're at I think, topic. I just didn't want to stop him in the middle of his flow
it's
chart.
actually about the verification and conflicting information. That's why it was timely more than anything. So Ryan Herman asked, according to the flow chart, if their FAFSA shows Tennessee residency, EVEA, and they answer yes to the in-state question on the application, and there is no conflicting information, then no additional documentation is required. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I will say, if you were one of our beginning schools, and this is why we reached out to Jonathan, we interpreted their policy much harsher than they did. And so you may have heard conversations at the beginning of last, like July, August, that are very different from what you're hearing today. I feel like that we were taking a much harder stance on what the policy read. And so I think it's important to talk about conflicting information. One of the things we found is we'll go on a campus and they collected a driver's license and it was from Georgia. That's conflicting information. That's considered on the ranch, something you have to resolve. So just know that when we're looking through the file, if those things exist and you haven't verified that, then that could be problematic.
JB, we have a residency and DEG related question. So just to verify, for our high school dual enrollment students, should we use whether they will have lived in Tennessee for 12 months once the school year starts in August, or the date when they are completing their DEG application? We start having students apply in April, the preceding school year.
So I think that might be a question, Leah, that you may want to step into on that. But what I will say about DEG, we're going to talk about DEG in just a second. So what you all do not know is there's two flow charts. This first flow chart is for adult students. The second flow chart is for dual enrollment students. So we might want to move into that one and then take the DE questions.
Let's put a pin in that one and we'll come back to it. I think I have one more before we move on. So, okay, this is a DE related question. So Danielle, we'll come back to yours in a moment as well. So I'm going to put a pin in Danielle's and a pin in Jacqueline's, and we will come back to both of those once we've discussed the DE flow chart.
Sounds good. And before we move to the DE, just one final comment I want to make where Leah was talking about those guardrails. I think it's important for schools to remember that try as best as you can to utilize the systems that you have, whether that be Banner or something else. What we don't want you to have to do is constantly be running reports and manually checking all these things. So again, just as an example of what our TBR schools do is once that coding is in place, we try our best to use the rules that Banner allows us to set up behind the scenes to actually stop the awarding and to stop the disbursement in the event something changes. So like, for example, you may have a student who at the time of awarding, the coding is correct and it shows in-state verified, but maybe something happens in admissions or the records office and that status changes. And that's why we have a disbursement rule that also would prohibit it in case it's awarded on the account. And it does a couple of things, right? It keeps you compliant, but it also doesn't overburden you with all these different manual processes of checking and verifying. So just, I don't know your systems outside of Banner, but that's a word to what I would think is just try to use your systems as much as you can to take some of that manual check off of yourself. Okay, not any other questions. I think we can move to the DE part.
Okay.
Okay, so this one is much easier than the adult student one. The first thing you'll notice is it says dual enrollment for minors. The reason for this, again, for private schools, you're not going to care as much about EVEA, but for the public schools, the students are not subject to EVEA if they are not 18 years of age. So you'll notice that first thing is use this flow chart if the individual is under 18. If the individual is 18 or older, then you would use the EVA and the residency flow chart. And that's how we at TBR are doing this. For our banner process at TBR, we actually use a 1 for in-state and a 2 for out-of-state. We use different coding than the first codes that you saw because those first codes are related to EVEA verifications. And we try to keep these separate and just have a simple 1 or 2 for in-state or out-of-state. You'll notice that we do ask a question on the application for EVEA, and that is just that even though they're not subject to it, if they self-identify that they do not qualify under EVEA, then we are going to treat them as a not under EVEA. We don't have to verify their EVEA unless they say that they are not lawfully present in the United States. So on the no, we'll talk about the no first. So if they say no to that question, we're going to go straight down to the bottom and we're going to make them an out of state and we'll notify them of the appeal process. And that appeal process is the same as the top. It goes back to attachment A, and we'll talk about attachment A in a couple of minutes. Let's say that they say yes to that question though. You'll notice on here, just a little bit different. We do two things. We have the question on the admission application about have you lived continuously in Tennessee for at least the last 12 months? And then we also say, are you attending a Tennessee high school? So we would have a verification check behind the scenes just to make sure that they're attending a Tennessee high school. If it's yes to both of those questions, then we have to leave the residency as 1 for in-state. If it's no to either, then we go to the attachment, a process for residency, which would be the attachment B. And we try to get as much documentation as we can from the student to show that they're a Tennessee resident at that point. But again, you'll notice we try to keep it simple up front. We're doing that with the questions that the student is answering on the application about the 12 months and if they're attending that Tennessee high school. Last piece on this one is just at the bottom. The way we handle students who are turning 18 right in the middle is that the student is subject to EVA when they turn 18 prior to the beginning of the term of enrollment. So if we have a dual enrollment student who is not 18 at the start of a fall term, they turn 18 in the middle of the fall term, then they are now subject to EVA at the beginning of, excuse me, at the beginning of the spring term. So we would not stop them halfway through a term to verify their EVA. We would wait till the next effective term to verify the EVA for them. Any other questions on this one? And we might want to
we have 3 questions right now. So I'll start with Jacqueline and let me scroll back up so I can read the question. Just to verify, for our high school dual enrollment students, should we use whether they will have lived in Tennessee for 12 months once the school year starts or the date when they are completing their DEG application?
So the way we would do this is when they're completing that admission app, if they've lived there 12 months at the point of that application, then they would be okay to be in state and they've answered those questions. If they haven't lived in Tennessee for at least 12 months by that time frame, then we would code them as out of state, but they could be updated to in state at the point that they have been in Tennessee for at least the 12 months. Or they can prove domicile. And we'll talk about domicile in just a few minutes with the attachment B. So the attachment B essentially allows a student to submit documentation that can be verified that would override that if they answer that they haven't lived in the state at least 12 months. I think it'll make a little bit more sense when we start looking at the attachments.
Okay. And I've been trying to answer as we went along, but that one was a bit wordy, so I'll add that in the Q&A. So next question from Danielle Wright. Previously, I was told that residency for DE students should be based on what our admissions office considers them. Has this changed?
So on this one, so this is a great question because I think it's important for everybody to understand this process is a handshake with your admissions and records offices, right? So financial aid offices cannot do this necessarily in a silo. That's why, like the admission application questions. So like when Leah and them were out auditing schools, they may notice if your admission office codes it incorrectly, for example, then you might have an issue if it's coded incorrectly. But if your admission office is following the process correctly and they're coding them as in state, then you follow that in your code and you say, yes, they're in state. So Danielle, I'd say that it's a mixed answer, right? There's responsibility on a financial aid office to verify that admissions and records is doing anything that they're doing correctly to fit that. But you are relying on what your admissions and records offices put into the system as far as the coding, because they're getting that information up front. They're the ones that are looking at the information and verifying that residency in the beginning. Now that I'm speaking for public school, TBR schools.
So, and I think where the issue would be here is if your admissions is not verifying for dual enrollment. I know that there are several schools who, prior to us coming on campus and realizing schools weren't verified, they did not feel like they had to verify their dual enrollment students, but they do have to be verified. So if there is not an admissions application, there's going to have to be something put in place. Like if you don't require those DEG students to do an admissions application, something would have to be put in place to capture this for those students.
Last question for now from Jessica Hunsacker. Based on the newest EVEA information from TBR Legal, we may accept a real ID from any state to verify EVEA. If the student has a Tennessee address, states that they have lived in Tennessee for at least 12 months, and has a Georgia real ID, would this be a compliance issue?
So it is conflicting information, Jessica, and that would require you then to go to the attachment and the student to submit further documentation, since it's a conflict that they have an out-of-state real ID.
Leo, I would assume would agree. Yes, no.
Yeah, I do. And I also think it's important, going back to your quality control. So if we get to your campus and you have a policy, we're going to want to see that in practice. So, we may look at the admissions application. We may, ask to see the reports. Do you have any reports where it's been worked that you had conflicting information, or can you show us what those reports are like? Because we want to make sure that it's not just you're collecting the information, but you're also doing something with it.
Yeah, I think Jessica's question's a good example of the differences between EVA and residency. Again, we talked about one earlier, but this is a really good example of a student who, if they turn in a Georgia Real ID, well, they're great for EVA. That shows lawful presence. But obviously that doesn't then have conflicting information for residency, and it requires just an extra step.
Okay, so we're good on questions now. Do you want to start with attachment A for EVEA?
Yeah, I'd say let's go to attachment A.
All right, let me, I'll probably need to zoom in for our viewing impaired folks, including myself. Is that big enough?
That's better, yes.
I can see it.
Okay, good deal.
Okay. So attachment A is related to the EVA verification. So if you remember back to the flow chart, if the student didn't do a FAFSA up front and they didn't have anything confirmed through that, then you could go to the attachment A and take documentation from it. Again, we try to make this as simple a process as possible. So the majority of students are going to fit into this first category. And you'll see if you're a U.S. citizen or possess either a Tennessee driver's license or a real ID from any state, you may verify your status by presenting one of the following. So only one of the documents they would have to submit. Most students are probably going to fit into the top categories there, where they're going to submit a Tennessee driver's license. That could be a learner's permit or even a restricted driver's license or a photo identification card. Or they might have the non-temporary driver's license with the real ID from any other U.S. state. So I think that just speaking with our admissions and records folks, that's where the majority of people are going to fall. But you'll see if they don't have that, then you can go on to some other things here, such as the birth certificate, unexpired U.S. passport, and so on. I won't bore you with going through all of those because you'll be getting these attachments that you can review. The important thing there, down at the bottom, which we don't have to necessarily go down there right now, but down at the bottom, you'll notice if they're turning something in like a birth certificate and it does not have a photo ID on it, of course, then they do need to submit a photo ID. with any document that doesn't have that. So we have a little note towards the bottom where that is required. I think it is, so number one there, if the document presented does not include a picture ID, applicant must submit some form of valid government issued picture ID for verification of identity along with the listed document. And then there's a second category of student, and it starts right there. And this is to establish status as a qualified alien who's lawfully present, if not a U.S. citizen, and does not possess a Tennessee or real ID driver's license. Then we have to have 2 of the following documents. And you'll notice there, I think there's 9 examples on that first part, and the second page has some continuing examples of documentation that could be submitted. And then we have a resource there that we use for documentation as well. Any questions on attachment A?
Not at the moment. We don't have any questions, no.
Okay. It's one of those things you'll probably need to get it and read it and, you know, see what you think. But we think it gives pretty clear guidance on what is and what is not acceptable as documentation.
Okay. Were you ready to go to attachment B? Sorry.
Nope, that's okay. And attachment B is that residency appeal guide. So again, on the flow chart, there was a reference there to attachment B. So if you have a student who answers the questions about residency, let's say they answer them incorrectly and they say no. Well, at that point, you want to do a residency appeal guide. And on this, you'll see there's 1 item from A or 2 items from B, or at least 1 item from B and 2 items from C. And then there's the examples of documentation that is included there in that. That's a pretty simple guide there. There's not a lot to that. And again, hopefully it's simplified down where it's not something that's too cumbersome to have to do. And most of your students would also hopefully fit into the category where there wouldn't be conflicting info and they would be able to answer the questions for residency. And that is all I have, if there are not any questions.
So we don't have any questions at the moment. Leah, you have anything else to add?
I don't think anything else to add. I know that this can be very confusing. The fact that EVEA for state institutions is woven into residency gets very confusing. And so I hope that you guys are starting to recognize the differences in those. It is, even though they're interwoven, they are different. They serve different purposes. James, I think, did we have a couple of questions?
Yeah, we just had a couple questions pop in. So Mickey from Dyersburg State, has this already been shared with the admissions offices?
Yes, for all of our TBR institutions, this was shared out on the monthly admissions and records call, and it was also shared on the financial aid directors call the same month as an FYI. So they are aware of that and they have been implementing it. For any TCATs that are on the call, this is being implemented for you all. We had a call with, I hope, everyone at the TCAT that needed to be involved, but if you were not on that call, just know this has also been shared out with TCATs, and our team is working on the banner coding right now in order to implement this for you all.
And so it's important for private schools that I would relay this information to your school, to your admissions office, because they may not understand this at all. Frankly, it is, if I'm honest, very confusing because we realize you're not a TBR school, but our statute requires that you at least measure residency for state programs that way. And so I would certainly encourage you to share that with your admissions folks.
Sure. And so one thing, Jessica Kelso, just another piece of the being shared with the admissions offices. And I would assume, JB, that any processes that need to be changed, I don't know that Dean needs to change anything, but I'm assuming following that call, any processes that needed to be changed are in the process of being updated.
Yeah, so for the most part, for our community colleges, they had been following this. There's some differences in the acceptable documentation. that can be used. So anything that they needed to modify, they're going through those processes and doing. And for the TCATs, that process, TBR Shared Services is working on right now to get those processes updated on there as well. I see there's some comments in here as far as there's not really any additional banner coding to that one question just at the very end. It's more that the coding was already there, but again, for the community colleges, it's a change in the acceptable documentation. Hopefully a little bit easier to work with, more so. And then for the TCATs, of course, that's a completely different banner system and that we are having to update. And then I also saw a question about, are there any verification requirements for students under 18? So thinking about them separately, for EVA, no, they're not subject to EVA if they're under 18. So you don't have to verify that. But for the residency, of course, then they would have to prove that they're a Tennessee resident if you're working with a dual enrollment student. And then for Robin Townsend, you had to go over the scenario again with the real ID. So Robin, the example where Jessica was asking the question on that, if you had a student who turned in a Georgia real ID to prove EVEA, and they answered all the other residency things correctly, for the EVA, there's no conflicting info. You can use that student's passed EVA with the Georgia real ID. The problem is for residency, all their answers are yes to residency, but they've turned in a Georgia driver's license with a real ID on it. So that at that point is a piece of conflicting info, and it needs just a little bit more information from the student of, you put Tennessee resident, but why do you have a Georgia real ID that you submitted? So to me, that's conflicting info. Robin, did that help?
So Rob, and then Jessica raised her hand. So Jessica may have a follow-up. Jessica, do you want to, if you can unmute, you're welcome to, or if you want to type your question in. I don't know that I can unmute you. So she may be typing, so we'll give her a second. Yeah, she can't unmute. Do you want to?
Oh, we'll wait for her to type maybe. And I just want to circle back, and I hate to beat a dead horse, but to Ryan's, I just want to, Ryan ask again, and JB just said this, I just want you to hear it again. Is there verification for students under 18? Although EVEA is not required, residency for state programs is 100% required. So just try to, I know that's, for me, it's confusing. Maybe it's not for y'all, but I just want to say again that residency is required for those students under 18.
Jessica, were you able to unmute? Okay, here we go. So we cannot, this is from Jessica, we cannot force a student to go get a Tennessee driver's license. That goes against the purpose of accepting a real ID from another state.
Yeah, so Jessica, in that scenario, what I would do, because it's conflicting info, I'd follow the flow chart and I would go to attachment B, and I would request that the student submit an item from list A to rectify the conflicting info.
So it would be the proof of receiving a state benefit, current mortgage statement or deed to property, proof of current classification, current military orders, DD 214. So one of those.
I would try to go with the first list, or if they don't have something from there, maybe something from a combination with the two items from list B, but hopefully they would have something like a mortgage statement or something to that there showing that. But because it is conflicting info, I think you would need to go to the attachment B and go through that. Does that help, Jessica? I'm sorry you can't unmute. I can't unmute you either. So
it's not, I thought she had, but it won't let me unmute either. So she commented that this direction had never been given or explained since we implemented EVEA.
Yeah, so Jessica, I think it's because it's a little bit different as to the fact of it's not really EVA, it is the residency piece. And I think that was something that, as Leah's saying, there was even some confusion with state schools on the fact that EVA is lawful presence, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a Tennessee resident. It just means that they're lawfully present. So in a world now where we're accepting real IDs from states outside of Tennessee, if they're doing that, then at that point, not everything that they're submitting is Tennessee. And I think that just warrants asking that student the question of, okay, you've answered these questions, but this is conflicting because now I have a real ID from Georgia, but you've answered all these questions on an admission app, and you really don't have any other documentation but the admission app to go off of. And Jessica, you can contact me if you want to after the call, you and Robin as well, so that we can kind of talk that through a little bit more. Because we might need to also mention that in the admissions and records group call for TBR.
Okay, I don't believe we have any others. We still have plenty of time, so we welcome any other questions or comments. I have a couple of updates on Tennessee Promise, more of things are coming than anything concrete, but I promise I won't take very much time. Okay, so we do have another question. This is good. The longer we stall, the more questions we get, and the more questions we get, the better. I really feel like for everyone this is new to. If a dependent student answers yes to Tennessee resident on the application and FAFSA, but parents indicate a different state on the FAFSA, would you consider that conflicting information needing to be resolved?
So I just lost JB, but
Yeah.
But based on his flow chart, you are not looking at parent information unless, I'm assuming that you would take because an 18-year-old may not have a mortgage statement. So you would obviously, if they're trying to verify residency and parents are here, but this is the student's residency verification, not the parents'.
So our colleagues at Milligan,
JB is locked out of the meeting. It won't let him back in. So.
Oh, nice. So
yeah.
I went back to sharing the EVEA Tennessee residence verification screen. And so if we were to work through the flow chart, the student answered yes to both. So yes to EVEA and residency, update residency to Z for in-state verified. Again, Z for in-state verified is a banner process. But as I mentioned earlier in the presentation when he was talking about this, in this example and the way you've written out your question, this student in FAST would actually be, as long as the student was a new enrollee, right, a class of 23 grad, this student would be calculating as ineligible in FAST. But based on the flow chart, you have a yes on the FAFSA and a yes on your admission application as a Tennessee resident. So this student would be updated to in-state verified in banner, but that would tell us that the student is verified as in-state. So what you would need to do is go to the student's residence history tab and update the student to verified resident, which would then force eligibility in FAST for that student.
So I think just to clarify, when you're on campus and you have conflicting information, whatever that is, and maybe you're changing a student in FAST to update their residency, either to make them a resident or to remove their residency. Just know when we come to campus, that's one of the things that we're looking at. So if you say that you're collecting these documents for residency, we expect to see them when we come to campus. So just know it's no different. And, I know we talked about admissions. Does admissions know this for TBR schools? A lot falls on financial aid. And so often it's things that you don't have control over, right? So you're trying to get your admissions office on board, or you may be trying to get the bursar on board, or you may be trying to get the registrar on board. This is very similar to that, but we would expect when we come to your campus, if you have verified residency because there was conflicting information, we would expect to see however you resolved that, we would expect that documentation to be there.
So I'll just, JB was able to join us. Welcome back. So I'll just ask JB I've clicked the wrong button and now my screen is, goodness, we can't get through one of these without technical difficulties. So JB, a question came in from one of our private school partners, and I'll just confirm that we answered it correctly if you don't mind. So if a dependent student answers yes to Tennessee resident on the application and the FAFSA, but parents indicate a different state on the FAFSA, would you consider that conflicting information? And so the way I answered this, because you had gotten booted, I went to your flow chart that I'm still sharing. And essentially the student answered yes to both EVEA by having a valid FAFSA and answered yes to resident. So that student would be in-state verified. Is that correct?
So we might need to research this a little bit more, and maybe one of our registrars from a TBR school on the call can help with this. In that kind of scenario there, I think you would want to go a step to make sure that the person is in state, because in TBR policy, as far as how we charge out of state tuition and fees, there is a section. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. Let's see. Bear with me just a second. Let me pull this policy up.
So our friends at Milligan, it sounds like the real answer in our best financial aid fashion is it depends.
Well, so the reason why we might want to look into that and get an answer back in the FAQ that's sent out is in our TBR policy, we have a category of out-of-state students who are not required to pay out-of-state tuition. And the first part of that is an unemancipated, currently enrolled student shall be reclassified out of state should their parent, having theretofore been domiciled in the state, remove from the state. However, such a student shall not be required to pay out-of-state tuition, nor be treated as an out-of-state student for admission purposes, so long as the enrollment is at a public higher educational institution or institution shall be continuous. So let me look into that before I actually definitively answer that. I think based on that policy, the answer would be if the student continuously stays enrolled, even if the parent left. And I think these kind of go a little bit hand in hand with this, that the student would continue to be considered in state for admission, so long as they didn't leave and then re-enroll. I think we need to look into that a little bit.
And I think what you just said is very important, JB. We're talking, you're verifying this upon admission.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are not verifying this every semester, right? Every academic year, you're verifying this upon admission. The only reason you would revisit it if the student maintains continuous enrollment and doesn't have to be readmitted is if conflicting data came in. Maybe the student was working for work study and submitted a Alabama license to the financial aid office and it created some type of issue, but you're not measuring this every academic year, correct?
Right.
Let me, this is Robert, Jonathan. Under this circumstance, especially if the student's been awarded, the student must indicate Tennessee under question 18 in order for TSAC to receive the ISER. So that would be critically important that the student does. If this institution receives the ISER and can't locate the student in FAST, it may be likely because Tennessee was not selected as the state of resident under question 18. That would be the student section.
So I'd say let's add that to the FAQs and get a definitive answer on that, if that's okay.
So just a clarifying question, for residency only, as long as the student answers yes on the FAFSA and their admission application and FAST shows a Tennessee residence, we don't need to provide additional proof of residence, correct?
Yeah, if there's not any conflicting information, I would not go any further. I think your key there, think about, so you all are financial aid folks, think about verification, federal verification, how there's a lot of things in federal verification that says, you don't have to go any further unless there's conflicting info. So that's kind of how we're approaching this as well. If you've got these answers are correct, you don't have anything at all that's conflicting, I wouldn't go any further on it.
Agreed.
Does that help, Janet?
And so for many of you, I think that to revisit, you can literally add a question to your admissions application. And as long as you have a method to input that data into your system and you can run a report, all that, you should only be looking at the students that there is conflicting information. We definitely, obviously that's why Jonathan created this great flow chart that hopefully it helps you take it back to your campus and create a streamlined process where you are not hand student, each single one verifying residency yourselves. That's not, we hope that you're going to get support from your campus, whether it be admissions, IT, to do that.
Okay, are there any other residency EVEA related questions? Okay, JB, I don't want you to get booted again just in case we have any other questions. And here we go, we have one. Going forward for incoming students, we would be adding it to our application for returning students. Do we need to also ask them?
If you have never verified residency, if you're a private school, then you would have to ask your current students who have already done an admissions application. Depending on your data system, maybe I can help you think of an easy way to do that without it being overburdening for your office. But you do have to verify everyone. So if you're paying them, you need to verify them, even if they have already completed the admissions application because they're a sophomore, junior, senior status. And then obviously each year, you're going to do this once if you've never done this before. And then each year it just becomes part of your normal process.
Okay, I don't believe we have any other questions. JB, you're welcome to stay on. I was going to transition into just a couple of very quick updates on Tennessee Promise. I will say I did not prepare any slides. Wasn't sure how long we were going to go. I had originally thought we would have our memo ready, our payment memo, our payments charts ready, but we got that information late Thursday, so we're in the process of finalizing those. I do hope to share those out. If not late this afternoon, hopefully mid-morning tomorrow. So you guys, and I will say we have a fast announcement with some good news TSAA related that's coming out today. So I will likely share mine tomorrow just so that we're not getting anything confused. So for all of our private school partners that are waiting on that, anxiously waiting with bated breath for your payment charts for 23-24, that information should be out. Like I said, late this afternoon, likely first thing in the morning for everyone. In addition to that, we have seen some of our partners who've had some issues with calculating award payments for Tennessee Promise. So we developed a payment calculator, and I'll be sharing that out as well. It would be valid for Tennessee Promise. Actually, I just had the thought I will make the same worksheet for Tennessee Reconnect. I do need to update the chart, if you will, that will calculate into the formulas for your award amount. So I'll get that updated and get that shared as well. So both of those will be out tomorrow for you guys. So that will assist in calculating awards if you don't have a process in place to calculate those, or if you just want something that will double check your work. As a reminder, for class of 24, the application will open August 1st. All of everything will just restart, right? So again, good news, the award amounts will be out first thing tomorrow. Calculator will be out in the morning. Do we have any questions? Oh, and for those of you who may not have tried to download a roster yet, if you are going in and attempting to download a Tennessee Promise roster today, we have a known issue. We don't know what the issue is just yet. We have shared it to fast support, but for some reason, rosters are not accessible for fall 23, summer 23, or fall 23 as they should be. As soon as we know what the issue is or we have the issue resolved, we'll share out a notice. So if you're planning to email me about it, you're welcome to email me. We always appreciate inundating our support team with, hey, this is broken. Just like anyone else, when something breaks, you want to tell everyone about it. And I understand that. So, but just know that we're aware of the issue. We're working very quickly to get that addressed. We know that especially our TCATs wanting to get those summer header payments posted. Some of our partners that are looking to go ahead and get their fall rosters pulled down so you can begin working those. And as an FYI, all community service is loaded. So your roster, there will be, as always, there will likely be some ones and twos that come in, but your rosters are populated for fall. For our TCAT partners, if you're pulling down your summer headers and you don't see a student that may have been a class of 23 grad that's on there, we get those emails. I actually have one from Wendy Riddle. We just shoot us an email if there's a TCAT header student that's not on your roster. Maybe that student submitted service and did not identify it as summer service, and so we didn't post a student on the summer roster. Just shoot us those students and we'll get with our POs and check those as we always do, and we'll get them on your header rosters if they completed the service. So with that, we're right at an hour. So we have a full hour. Leah and I can go back to our banter like we were when we started. JB is welcome to join in the banter. I'm happy also to give you guys an hour of your Monday morning. I know everybody has a ton of stuff going on as we're like, about 5 weeks away from the start of school. So we don't want to take up any more of your time that we don't have to take up. But one last call for questions. And as a reminder, we are recording the webinar. I will post the webinar online. I will also at our fancy new website. Thank you, Suzette. She may or may not be on with us, but she made us a website for that. We'll also share all the documents, and we'll develop and share the Q&A for everyone. And Jason C. asked me if I was going to share the documents online, like immediately in the webinar. I'm not that fancy. I fear I'll break something. We'll learn to do that, and in the future, if we have attachments, we'll share those. But they'll be out very soon. So 2 things. JB texted me. I think he has an answer to our one question. So let me ask Kristen's question, JB, and then we'll come back to your answer. Okay.
Okay, unless we missed a Kelly question as well, Kelly Rowland. So we can circle back that because it's related to Jonathan's.
Okay, so all right, so we'll come back to her question. So somebody just joined us as well. Welcome. So would you please repeat the timing of the 12-month Tennessee residency requirement? If they have resided in Tennessee less than 12 months at the time of the admission application or filing FAFSA, but it will be 12 months by the time they begin the term aid disperses, would that meet the requirement?
If the student is meeting the 12 months by the time that the term starts, then they would be considered in-state. Now, you may want to wait on your coding. I don't know how you're going to do that at your institution. If they do an admission application, let's say like 6 months ahead of time, you'd probably want to remain that student as out of state. However, then once they've been there at least 12 months, then you could update it. That, you want to do that with your own thing there. But as long as it's the 12 months by the time of that term, then I don't see any issue there with them meeting that residency part. Also, think about it this way too. If they can't show the 12 months, you could also always go to the attachment B for the residency appeal. And if they had documentation like the mortgage, that could be something very simple that you could just get and document with that if you wanted to take it that step too.
Okay, so then we have another question, but we'll go to let JB clarify back to one of our other questions, and then we'll work through these other questions.
So JB, to follow up to Kelly's question, which I think you're about to revisit, she ended her comment with, but if there is a student enrolled in a Tennessee school the previous year and has continual enrollment, but the parent moves out of state, the student is eligible for the current year, but the next year they would be ineligible. So she's kind of asking that as a question, would they be ineligible the following year?
Yeah, so let's go back to our policy. So the first question was more about what do you do with a student who is saying that they're a resident, but their parent shows that they're not a resident. So we actually do have that as far as in TBR policy, how to deal with that with the out-of-state. In our out-of-state determination policy, there's a section that says the domicile of an unemancipated person is that of their parent, except as provided in subsection E. So subsection E is very important because it is essentially saying that the student actually is classified in state if the student's a citizen of the United States, regardless of the citizenship of their parents, has resided in Tennessee for at least the 1 year prior to admission, and one of three things: graduated from a Tennessee public secondary school, graduated from a private secondary school that is located in the state, or earned a Tennessee high school equivalency diploma. So if you have those things, if that student graduated from Tennessee high school and they've answered the questions on their admission app that they are a resident, they've been here at least 12 months, I think that was the original question, then that person is eligible for in-state coding. And that parent's information as being out of state would not be conflicting information because it's in TBR policy that is an exception to the domicile of the student if the parent is domiciled outside the state. Does that answer the question? Or is it as clear as mud?
I think to summarize, basically similar to how I answered it, that would not, in essence, it would not be considered conflicting information because we have yes to both questions, correct? Yes to EVA, yes to residency.
Yes, and the reason why it's a little bit different than the Georgia question earlier is because this is an exception in policy that talks about unemancipated students and not having to follow the parents' information for domicile if they meet these other requirements.
And to Kelly's question, and Robert may chime in as well, to Kelly's follow-up, continuous enrollment is important in her question.
Yes.
If the parents move, as long as the student maintains continuous enrollment, residency is maintained, or status as considered, or eligibility is maintained, as long as continuous enrollment is maintained, even if the parents move out of state.
I would agree as well.
Section in the policy that we read first. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And James, just to that point, that's why I added, it's important that, because some students may not be aware of that and indicate under question number 18 that they reside in another state, and that TSAC would then never receive the ISER.
Right.
So,
yeah. And
although they may not be aware of that, we would need to inform the student the reason why, or potential reason why TSAC did not receive the student's ISER, because at the time of completing the application, they indicated the other state as their state of residence.
And to further muddy these waters as we think through Tennessee Reconnect, if I am a Tennessee Reconnect student and I move out of state, none of this applies, because at that point I am no longer a Tennessee resident. So continuous enrollment or not, I am the student. I moved out of state. So I would then be a Georgia resident, or I would be a Kentucky resident, or an Oregon resident attempting to take online courses, which we have had that student present that before.
And I see a question in here from Morgan, the last question. Leah might want to chime in on this too. My take on this one, Leah, and bash me over the head if you think this is incorrect, but my take on this one is that you can't just use that FAFSA answer, because I think that's the whole reason we're here today, right? Is that you can't just take an answer that's on the FAFSA. You have to also combine it with the admission app, something else. So Morgan, the way I would answer that is that's a great piece that you could use in your coding. So if somebody says no, I would be cautious on the 5 year though, because again, it only is a 1 year. I think there's other ways that you could be looking at the information rather than that 5 year, but you could use that in your coding, but you couldn't just rely on that one question on the FAFSA and not have something else that you're collecting, like a self-attestation from the student through the admission app or something like that. Leah, you might want to take.
You're spot on. So you still need to add those minimally the admissions applications and then the additional verification steps should, because I will tell you that we tracked the answers to those questions for a while and they were not accurate. So you would need to add the additional per the policy, some type of admissions app questions that helps you verify on the front end, hopefully the majority of your students, so that you're only actually having to collect data from those one-offs that are not residents of the state. Are there any other questions? Since James alluded to the TSAC email, I'll let this small group know that you'll receive an email, probably because I don't know that I can send them, but I pretend that only James can send them. So James is going to send the email for me. But you'll get a fast email over the weekend. We awarded students who have correctly applied, completed the FAFSA through July 1st. So in FAST, both their FAFSA and their completion dates are July 1st or prior, and we increased the EFC to 6656, which is max Pell for 23-24. So you'll see a few additions from way back where we increased EFC that have older dates. But all of your reports are updated, and so hopefully that helps you guys before you go into August, get those on accounts.
And Leah, it's a very, very difficult process. I may be the only person that's been able to master it. So I'll continue doing those for you and Robert as they come in.
I appreciate that because I'm
You
pretending
are
I
the
don't know
man.
how.
I say that with all the sarcasm. It's super simple, but that's okay.
I just pretend like I don't know how. So, maybe I could be taught, but
it's okay.
Hey, can I add a certification? Certification for dual enrollment will open on the 20th, Thursday. I, Jana, and me have been receiving inquiries from students about dual enrollment being billed and not seeing the amount on their fee statement. But just want to make the schools aware that the certification roster will open on the 20th. I think Hope is open now, and some of the other programs may be as well.
Good deal. Okay, guys, are there any other questions? Like I said, just another reminder, we have recorded. So I'll stop the recording when we're all done. We will share out we'll post the recording. We'll post all of the documents that JB referenced during his presentation. We will also post a Q&A. The Q&A may take us to the first of next week, just because I'd go to the transcription, I take down all the questions, I take down all the answers, I'll share them to everyone who participated in the call as a presenter, and then we'll, once we're all comfortable with our answers, we'll get those posted as well. Okay?
And huge shout out to JB and TBR for
thank you,
getting this
very
together.
Much.
It is much, I know it was a labor of love, so it is much appreciated.
Okay, guys. Without any other questions, again, to echo Leah, thank you, JB. Thank you to everyone at TBR for the help. JB, you have a call coming in from Taneka very soon. You're welcome. All right, guys. Everyone have a wonderful Monday. Thank you, guys. Have a nice day.